Aston Martin DBS 770 Ultimate, which in a way could equally be interpreted as final, because that's what this is. Not only is it the ultimate incarnation of the DBS platform, but it is the final. After all 499 of these cars have been made, wait for it. Yes, that's 300 of the coupes and 199 of the Volantes. That'll be it. No more DBS. And what a swan song moment. It is the most powerful DBS that Aston Martin have ever made at, as the name would suggest, 770 PS, which is, in old money, around about 760 horsepower. But actually, for me, it's not necessarily the horsepower that is the impressive figure here, it's the torque. 663 pounds-feet, not newton meters, pounds-feet of torque. And that's where the magic in this car has been applied, because you'd be forgiven for thinking that Aston have just done a sort of stylistic facelift on this car and thrown in some new seats, which, by the way, are some of the most beautiful seats that I've ever seen or sat in. But no, Aston, in this new phase of their life, have actually thrown a lot more engineering work at this car, and it's where the torque meets the tarmac where the magic really happens. Now, I want to throw back to set some context as to why this is important. When I first drove the, dare I say it, standard Aston Martin DBS, the way the torque was applied, dare I say it, was simply too much. There was just too much available power low down in the rev range. And as a result, unless you were on a dry, hot, sticky day, frankly, the traction control light was lighting up like a Christmas tree, and it was quite annoying. You were aware that you had all of this power, but most of the time, particularly in the UK, where our ambient temperatures aren't that impressive, you just couldn't put the power to the floor. This is a different ballgame. When I first read the specs on paper, I was guilty of thinking, crikey, it's not like you step out of a standard DBS and go, do you know what that needs? More torque. But that's exactly what they've done. More power, more torque, more engineering. And that's the really key bit to share about this car. You see, you can think of the process that Aston have applied to this as getting a torque jockey. Bear with me, that's right. They've applied this very talented torque rider and given him the reins to the torque band, the application of where this torque is applied throughout the gears, which means you don't have necessarily all of the torque available at all of the time, which means you can plant your foot flat in fairly decent conditions and listen to this thing. Now let me be frank with you. In the previous DBS, I've just started this video. The tyres are cold. We've not been on it. You simply wouldn't be able to plant foot in the previous DBS and not have either your nose introduced to the undergrowth or the traction control of just completely killed that sense of occasion. In this, they've reworked it entirely. Now, what's also impressive is the marriage between the engine, the drivetrain, and all of that power through a revised gearbox calibration. Now, it is ultimately the same 8-speed ZF torque converter automatic. However, listen to the crispness of the upshifts. It's swift and it's crisp. And on the downshifts too. It's not quite twin clutch. Upshifts are. Honestly, it is amazing what is still available in the components that they put into a standard car. They've obviously had feedback and they've probably let it out of the door and gone, do you know what? If we just spend a little bit more time, a little bit more money, and a little bit more R&D on developing this component, that component, on paper, this is a classic case. On paper, doesn't sound a big deal. More torque, more horsepower, some new seats, it looks really cool. There's some thermal optimizing going on with that very Victor-inspired vent on the bonnet. But it's the nuances of the things that they don't tell you about, which is probably in their language the boring stuff about how they calibrated the ECU to sort of bleed torque in throughout the rev range so you don't get any unwanted torque slip. That stuff has made this car frankly terrifying in the wet to entirely usable, and in the dry, The power of this is now up there in the dry with some of the punchiest of supercars. However, we're going to return to the performance stakes in just a moment while I conveniently wind my way into a slow, sleepy village. You see, that is the Jekyll and Hyde nature of this car, and ultimately, probably its most interesting appeal is that while it does have a 5.2 litre twin turbocharged V12 developing 760 brake horsepower, 770 PS if you're wondering where 770 is in the name, you can also drop it back into automatic like so and swan along in refinement and comfort, and as per the pedestrians on that sidewalk there, turn heads in the most respectful of ways. And what I mean by that is I'm really fortunate in this line of work to be able to experience the what I would call pavement etiquette of passers-by, other people on the road, and it's quite interesting the reception that you get for different brands and different cars, and even the colours in which they're painted. And this is in a deep, rich, I think it might be ultramarine blue, and it just looks, as Miles Nürnberger, one of the most iconic designers of Aston Martin, once said to me, a brute in a suit. I think that must be the most appropriate description for this car, because it is exactly that. It is sophisticated in that it seems like it's been to a finishing school. However, when you press your sport button there and drop it down a few cogs, it'll do this thing. Yeah, it's very cool. And so what about the way it handles? Well, the car is stiffer from a structural rigidity point of view, only very mildly. They've done something to the the undersurface of this car, making it slightly stiffer. But the suspension stiffness as well has been tweaked. Most notably is the front end. The front end turning on this. So what they've basically done here is done a very good job of balancing both ends of the car. On the one hand, as I just touched on, there is now much more traction available due to the torque management. And then front end as well is also much more confidence inspiring. It's a stiffer car, you can feel it's a stiffer car, but I wouldn't say it's compromised its GT credentials as such. You just know that you're in something a little bit more akin to performance. Perhaps in the way that Ferrari approached the TDF to the 812 is perhaps the ethos that I could draw comparisons with Aston Martin from the DBS to the 770 Ultimate. It's just tweaked, it's just sort of on its toes a little bit more, it's a bit more alert, but I think the number one word here that I'm getting back from this experience is confidence. No longer am I thinking, God, when is this torque going to snap my head off? Nor am I sending it into a tight corner thinking it's going to wash out with any degree of understeer. And then combine that with this revised transmission, it's not quite twin clutch. And interestingly, drawing comparisons with Ferrari just now, you'd be right in thinking that this would be a direct competitor to something like an 812 Superfast. I would definitely say the transmission, being a twin clutch in an 812 Superfast, is definitely a more superior, I guess, driver connection. However, what this does very well is suits its purpose, which is, as a Grand Tourer, it does the sort of effortlessly wafting thing very, very well for having a more conventional auto. It really depends on what your use case is with the car. There's something I'm going to touch on now, though, that you can't Google. The stats or measurement for what I'm about to share isn't out there. It's not something that perhaps you can even get a gauge on, and that is how it makes you feel. Now, I don't know if that's just because of the Aston brand, the way this thing looks, the way it smells. Genuinely, Astons have a certain smell about them. But I'm just going to say it as it is. When I get in this car, I've had this now for the last 3 days, and I feel like a goddamn rock star. I can't explain it. It looks unbelievable. I think it's because it is this balance of refinement and aggression in one package. And I think the most defining feature of this is as you enter a 30 zone into a village, you feel respectful and you feel sophisticated. And then as soon as you see that national speed limit, you drop a cog, and you know you can do that with it. By the grace of Gaydon, these boys have done the magic. Now, in a way, it's a bit of a shame because I'll be totally honest with you, the Ultimate Edition feels how I hoped the standard DBS always should have felt. But I'm thankful that it's been acknowledged. I'm thankful that it's been changed. And truth be told, Aston as a company is in a totally different place, a different world from when they originally launched the standard DBS. So I get it, I totally get it. Now, if there was any criticism, it's this thing here, the infotainment system. The screen, it's beautiful, it's big, it has Apple CarPlay. However, what it doesn't have is the ability for me to touch it. And it's so inviting, and it's so 2023, and there's no touchscreen there. And I know while I'm driving this 315 grand Super GT that you're probably thinking, oh, what a first world problem. But it is exactly that. It is a first world problem. If I'm spending that kind of money, I do want a touchscreen to be able to go, hey, Spotify, play me some Kill Switch Engage, but can't do that. I have to go down here to a very old interaction system and clumsily move through all of the menus and then press physical buttons. Do you remember those things? Imagine that. So that's the only downside. Truth be told, over the few days that I've been very fortunate to spend some seat time in this thing, the process to get around that is to sit in the car while it's warming up, plug your phone in to the little USB port down there, set everything up on Apple CarPlay so you've got your Waze on to your destination and you've got your Spotify on, and then let it go. Then it's fine. What would have made this car literally perfect is if there was upgraded infotainment. Now, we are on the dawn of the new DB11 launching. If they don't have a touchscreen or revised infotainment system in that, I'm going to take back everything I just said about the whole brand. It's the only thing. It's the only thing. And then there's just been one of the most complete, beautiful car experiences ever. Now, as you can imagine, making only 300 coupes, they're all accounted for. They are all sold. And honestly, I think when we look back in this particular chapter of Aston Martin, I think not only is it a very special time, because since DBS was launched and since this has come to the end of its life, Aston are in F1, and as we speak, they're doing pretty flipping well. And so I'm really, in a strange way, looking forward to looking backwards and going, yeah, this car marks quite an interesting moment in that brand's history. And I'll be up front with you, it's one of my favourite brands, and it's not anything to do with how they go, how they look, how they sound, or anything like that. It's the moment that I was speaking about back there. The way it makes you feel, it's just a beautiful brute in a suit machine that I'm so thankful that they've made. So anyone who's got one, congratulations, you're incredibly lucky. And anyone who hasn't, let's just give Aston a round of applause for taking what is one of their most iconic cars, turning up the wick to 11 and celebrating it.